The phone call that destroyed my world came at 3:47 on a Tuesday afternoon. Officer Rodriguez's voice cut through my kitchen like broken glass as he explained that a drunk driver had plowed into my husband David's car at 60 miles per hour. David was gone. Our twin daughters, Emma and Sophie, just 4 years old, were gone. All three of them stolen from me in a single horrific moment. Through my sobs, I dialed my parents with shaking fingers, desperate for the comfort only family could provide. When my father Thomas answered, I choked out the devastating news between gasps. His response froze my blood. "Today is your brother Jake's 28th birthday. We can't come. We already made reservations at that fancy steakhouse downtown." The funeral home felt like a mausoleum of my shattered dreams. I sat alone in the front row, staring at 3 closed caskets that contained my entire universe. The attendance was heartbreakingly sparse. David's elderly Aunt Margaret had driven 4 hours from Buffalo, her arthritic hands clutching a tissue box. 3 of my teaching colleagues from Roosevelt Elementary sat quietly in the back, their presence a small comfort in the vast emptiness. My principal, Mrs. Henderson, had sent a beautiful wreath, but even she couldn't attend due to a school board meeting. The funeral director, a gentle man named Mr. Carlson, approached me during the viewing hour with a puzzled expression. He whispered that my parents had never returned his calls about flower arrangements or memorial contributions. I nodded numbly, too exhausted to explain that they were probably selecting the perfect wine pairing for Jake's birthday dinner at that exact moment. As Reverend Williams delivered the eulogy, I felt my phone vibrate in my purse. Against my better judgment, I glanced at the screen. Facebook notifications. My stomach churned as I opened the app with trembling fingers. There, posted just 20 minutes earlier, were photos of my parents beaming at an elaborate birthday celebration. Jake stood behind a towering chocolate cake shaped like a football, his favorite team's logo, meticulously crafted in frosting. The caption read, "Best birthday son ever. So grateful for our amazing boy." The timestamp showed they had posted this while Reverend Williams was reading Psalm 23 over my daughter's tiny caskets. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. While I was selecting songs that Emma and Sophie would never hear again, my parents were documenting their joy for the world to see. While I was choosing flowers for graves that should never have existed, they were raising champagne toasts to their precious son. The contrast was so stark, so cruel, that I felt something inside me break completely. During the graveside service, as they lowered my babies into the ground, I made a decision that would change everything. I blocked my parents' phone numbers, deleted them from my social media accounts, and erased every digital connection between us. If they could choose a birthday party over burying their granddaughters, then they had chosen to lose their remaining daughter as well. Margaret squeezed my hand as dirt fell onto the caskets. "Honey, family doesn't always mean blood," she whispered. "Sometimes the people who show up are more important than the ones who don't." Her words planted a seed that would grow into something powerful, though I couldn't imagine it then. The empty house that night echoed with absence. Emma's stuffed unicorn still sat on the couch where she'd left it that morning. Sophie's art project, a handprint turkey for Thanksgiving, remained unfinished on the kitchen counter. David's coffee mug sat in the sink, unwashed, still bearing the faint impression of his lips. I curled up on our bed, surrounded by the ghosts of my former life, and wept until I had no tears left. The silence was broken only by the sound of my phone, which I'd forgotten to silence. Notification after notification chimed as relatives and family friends commented on my parents' birthday celebration photos. "What a wonderful family! Jake looks so happy. You must be so proud." Each comment felt like another shovel of dirt on my children's graves. That night, as I lay staring at the ceiling, I realized that grief wasn't just about loss. It was about discovery, too. I had discovered exactly who my parents truly were when the mask of normalcy was stripped away. They had shown me their priorities with crystal clarity, and I would never forget the lesson. 3 weeks after the funeral, I was attempting to sort through David's office when the doorbell rang. I opened it to find a professional-looking woman in her 50s, holding a leather briefcase and wearing a sympathetic expression. "Mrs. Aaron Caldwell, my name is Helen Morrison from Continental Insurance Investigations. I'm very sorry for your loss. May I come in? I have some important information regarding your husband's life insurance policy." I led her to the living room, my mind foggy with grief and confusion. David had mentioned life insurance in passing, but I'd never paid much attention to the details. Helen opened her briefcase and withdrew a thick folder. "Mrs. Caldwell, I need to inform you that your husband had a substantial life insurance policy that you may not have been aware of. The policy is worth $2 million, and you are listed as the sole beneficiary." The number hit me like a thunderclap. $2 million! I stared at Helen, certain I'd misheard. "I don't understand," I stammered. "David never mentioned anything like that. We always talked about our finances together." Helen's expression grew serious. "According to our investigation, your husband purchased this policy 6 months ago through his business partner's insurance agency. He paid the premiums directly from his business account, which explains why you might not have noticed the payments." My confusion deepened. Why would he do that without telling me? "Mrs. Caldwell, this is where things get complicated." Helen pulled out another document. "We've discovered that your husband suspected his business partner, Marcus Flynn, of embezzling funds from their construction company. David had been quietly gathering evidence and apparently took out this policy as protection for you and your children should anything happen to him while he was investigating." The room seemed to spin around me. David had known something was wrong at work and had been protecting us without saying a word. The weight of his foresight, his love, his desperate attempt to shield us from whatever storm he saw coming overwhelmed me. "The policy includes accidental death coverage, which means the full amount will be paid out despite the circumstances of the accident," Helen continued. "However, I must inform you that Mr. Flynn has been arrested for embezzlement and fraud. Your husband's evidence led to a federal investigation that uncovered over $800,000 in stolen funds." As Helen explained the paperwork and next steps, my mind raced with possibilities. $2 million wouldn't bring my family back, but it could give me the freedom to honor their memory in ways I'd never imagined. I didn't have to return to teaching immediately. I didn't have to worry about the mortgage or medical bills. I could take time to heal, to plan to build something meaningful from the ashes of my loss. After Helen left, I sat in David's office chair and opened his desk drawer. Hidden beneath insurance documents and business files, I found a handwritten note in his familiar scrawl. "For Aaron, Emma, and Sophie. If you're reading this, something happened to me. Use this to build the life we dreamed of. I love you all forever. David." The tears came again, but this time they carried something different. Not just grief, but gratitude. Not just loss, but possibility. David had given me one final gift, the means to transform our tragedy into something powerful. That evening, I began to formulate a plan. It started as a whisper of an idea, fragile as a soap bubble, but it grew stronger with each passing hour. I would use David's gift to create something that would ensure no other grieving parent would face the isolation I had endured. I would build a sanctuary for families in crisis, a place where support was unconditional and love wasn't rationed based on birthdays or convenience. I kept the plan to myself, sharing it with no one. Not David's Aunt Margaret, not my teaching colleagues, certainly not my parents who continued their radio silence. This would be my secret mission, my way of channeling grief into purpose. The insurance money would become the foundation for something unprecedented. I just had to figure out exactly what that something would be. The weeks following Helen's visit passed in a strange bubble of isolation and determination. I moved through my days like a ghost, avoiding the familiar places that held too many memories. The grocery store where Emma always begged for cookies, the park where Sophie learned to swing, the coffee shop where David and I used to steal quiet moments during our lunch breaks. I changed my phone number without informing my parents, tired of seeing their names flash across my screen, with calls I had no intention of answering. The voicemails they'd left before I blocked them ranged from confused to angry to pleading, but never genuinely apologetic. My father's messages were particularly galling. "Aaron, you're being dramatic. Family is family. Call us back." My mother's attempts were weepier but equally self-serving. "Sweetheart, we're so worried about you. We just want our family back together." But they had made their choice about what family meant to them, and I had made mine. I found a small apartment across town in a complex called Sunset Gardens, far from the house where my children's laughter still echoed in every room. The move was both practical and symbolic. I couldn't heal while surrounded by constant reminders of what I'd lost, and I needed space to plan what I was going to build. My new neighbors were mostly young professionals and retirees who kept to themselves, which suited me perfectly. I spent my days researching, planning, and slowly transforming my grief into something constructive. I read about trauma counseling, child psychology, and grief support services. I studied successful nonprofit organizations and community mental health programs. The insurance money sat untouched in a special account, waiting for its purpose to crystallize. Then on a cold Thursday in February, my carefully constructed isolation was shattered by an unexpected phone call. The number was unfamiliar, but when I answered, Jake's voice came through the speaker, shaky and desperate. "Aaron, please don't hang up. I got your new number from Margaret. I need to talk to you." I should have ended the call immediately, but something in his tone stopped me. Jake sounded different, smaller, frightened. "What do you want, Jake?" My voice was flat, emotionless. "It's Mom and Dad," he said, and I could hear him crying. "They're in real trouble, Aaron. They're going to lose the house. They've been hiding it from everyone, but they're broke. Completely broke." I felt a cold satisfaction at this news, though I kept my voice neutral. "That's not my problem. Please just listen. They've been living on credit cards for 2 years trying to keep up appearances. All those expensive dinners, the trips, my birthday parties, everything. They maxed out every card they had, took out a second mortgage borrowed against Dad's retirement, and his voice broke completely. "I let them. I encouraged it. Every time they wanted to spend money on me, I said yes. I never asked where it came from." The picture he painted was exactly what I'd suspected. My parents had been living a lie, funding Jake's expensive lifestyle while drowning in debt. The fancy restaurants, the elaborate birthday celebrations, the constant stream of gifts and indulgences, all of it built on borrowed money they couldn't afford to repay. "The bank started foreclosure proceedings last week," Jake continued. "They're going to lose everything. Dad lost his job at the warehouse because he's been so stressed he can't function. Mom's been having panic attacks. They're scared, Aaron. Really scared. And you think I should care because you're their daughter, because family is supposed to help family." The hypocrisy of his words hit me like a slap. Family is supposed to help family. Where was that philosophy when I was burying my husband and children? Where was family when I needed them most? Jake was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. "You're right. We failed you. I failed you. I've always been selfish, always expected everything to revolve around me. But they're desperate, Aaron. They know they were wrong. They know they messed up. Then they can figure out how to fix it themselves. They can't. They're too proud to declare bankruptcy, too ashamed to ask for help from anyone else. You're the only person they have left." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I'm the only person they have left. They threw me away when I needed them. They chose your birthday party over my children's funeral. They made their priorities crystal clear. I know, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for all of it. I should have told them to cancel the party to be with you instead. I should have driven to the funeral myself, but I was selfish and stupid, and I thought only about myself." His confession should have felt like a victory, but it just felt hollow. Too little, too late. "If you're actually sorry, then you'll understand why I can't help them," I said quietly. "They taught me that family loyalty has conditions, that love comes with fine print, They showed me exactly what I mean to them when they chose a birthday celebration over supporting me through the worst day of my life. Aaron, please. No, they made their choice and now they get to live with the consequences, just like I've had to live with mine. I hung up and immediately blocked Jake's number as well, but his call had accomplished something unexpected. It had given me the final piece of my plan. If my parents thought money could solve their problems, if they believed financial security was more important than family bonds, then I would show them what real wealth looked like. I would use David's insurance money to build something so significant, so meaningful that it would make their petty materialism look pathetic by comparison. And I would make sure the whole world knew exactly why I was doing it. Spring brought with it a renewed sense of purpose that I hadn't felt since the accident. Armed with David's insurance money and months of careful research, I was ready to transform my vision into reality. The first person I contacted was Casey Williams, an architect whose work I'd admired in the local newspaper. Her firm specialized in community buildings designed to promote healing and wellness. Casey met me at a small coffee shop in downtown Albany on a sunny Tuesday morning. She was a woman in her early 40s with short gray hair and intelligent eyes that seemed to see everything. When I explained what I wanted to build, her expression shifted from polite professionalism to genuine excitement. A children's trauma counseling center, she repeated, leaning forward in her chair. That's exactly what this community needs. I've been hoping someone would tackle this kind of project for years. I outlined my vision, a state-of-the-art facility designed specifically for children who had lost parents or experienced severe trauma. Not just office spaces for therapy sessions, but environments that would feel safe and nurturing. Art rooms where kids could express emotions they couldn't verbalize, play areas designed by child psychologists, quiet spaces for family meetings, gardens where healing could happen outdoors. I want every detail to be intentional, I explained. The colors, the lighting, the way sound travels through the building. Nothing should feel clinical or institutional. This should feel like the safest place in the world. Casey pulled out her notebook and started sketching ideas as I spoke. What's your budget range? $1.5 million for the building and initial setup. I want to reserve the rest for operating costs and expansion. Her pen stopped moving. Did you say $1.5 million? Is that enough? Casey laughed, but it was a sound of amazement rather than amusement. Aaron, that's enough to build something incredible. Most community mental health projects I work on have budgets under $200,000. With that kind of funding, we can create something truly revolutionary. We spent the next 3 hours discussing possibilities. Casey introduced me to her colleague Ryan Mitchell, a contractor who specialized in nonprofit construction projects. Ryan was a large man with calloused hands and a gentle demeanor who listened intently as I described my vision. My company has a policy of working at cost for projects like this, Ryan said. What you're describing will help a lot of families. Consider it our contribution to the community. By the end of our meeting, the basic framework was in place. Casey would design a 10,000 square foot facility with space for individual and group therapy, family counseling, art therapy, play therapy, and administrative offices. Ryan would handle construction, aiming for completion within 8 months. I would handle permit staffing and program development. As we prepared to leave, I made one final request. I want to name it Emma and Sophie's Place, after my daughters. Casey's eyes filled with tears. That's beautiful. They'll be helping other children forever. That evening, I sat in my apartment surrounded by architectural plans and contractor estimates, feeling truly excited for the first time since the accident. This project would be my daughter's legacy and David's final gift to the world. Every child who found healing in those rooms would be touched by the love that my family had shared. But as the project gained momentum, I realized that building the center was only half of my mission. The other half would require something I'd been avoiding: publicity. If I wanted this story to have maximum impact, if I wanted people to understand why this center existed and what it represented, I would need to share my story publicly. 3 weeks later, a reporter from the Albany Times-Union called. Sarah Chen had heard about the project through the building permit applications and wanted to write a feature story about the new trauma center. I agreed to meet with her, though I hadn't yet decided how much of my personal story I was willing to share. The interview would change everything, though I didn't know it yet. It would expose my family's cruelty to the world, trigger a chain reaction that would reach far beyond anything I'd imagined, and ultimately give me the justice I'd never thought possible. But that was still weeks away. For now, I was content to watch Casey's blueprints transform into Ryan's construction timeline, to see my grief slowly becoming something that would help other families survive their darkest moments. Emma and Sophie would have been so proud of what we were building in their memory. And somewhere, I believe David was smiling down at the way his final gift was blooming into something beautiful. The center would be more than a building. It would be proof that love could survive even the worst betrayal, that purpose could grow from pain, and that sometimes the family that mattered most was the one you built from scratch when your original family failed you completely. The Albany Times-Union occupied a modest brick building downtown, its newsroom buzzing with the controlled chaos of deadline pressure. I arrived for my interview with Amanda Rodriguez 15 minutes early, clutching a folder containing photos of Emma and Sophie, along with preliminary sketches of the trauma center. Amanda was younger than I'd expected, probably in her early 30s, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and sharp, intelligent eyes. She led me to a small conference room decorated with framed front pages from significant local news events. "Thank you for agreeing to this interview, Mrs. Caldwell. I have to be honest, when I first heard about your donation, I assumed it was coming from a wealthy family or corporate foundation. A private individual funding a project of this magnitude is extraordinary." I settled into the chair across from her, my hands folded carefully in my lap. My husband's life insurance policy made it possible. He would have wanted the money to help children. Amanda pulled out a digital recorder and a yellow legal pad. "Before we start, I should mention that this story is generating interest beyond our local readership. The state desk has asked me to file it for statewide distribution, possibly even national pickup if it resonates with readers." My stomach tightened. I'd agreed to a local feature story, not statewide coverage. What does that mean exactly? "It means your story could reach hundreds of thousands of readers across New York State, possibly more if other papers pick it up. The combination of personal tragedy, family betrayal, and community healing creates a powerful human interest narrative that tends to spread on social media." The word betrayal hung in the air between us. Amanda had clearly done her homework about my family situation, though I hadn't yet decided how much detail I was willing to share publicly. "Let's start with the basics," Amanda continued. "Tell me about Emma and Sophie." For the next hour, I painted a picture of my daughter's brief but brilliant lives. Emma's obsession with unicorns and her habit of singing made-up songs while coloring. Sophie's love of building elaborate block towers and her fierce protectiveness of her twin sister. Their shared bedtime ritual of insisting on just one more story every single night. Amanda listened with genuine interest, occasionally asking follow-up questions that showed she understood the depth of my loss. When I described the accident, her professional composure cracked slightly. "I can't imagine facing something like that alone," she said quietly. "I wasn't supposed to be alone," I replied before I could stop myself. Amanda's pen stopped moving. "What do you mean?" This was the moment I'd been dreading. Once I spoke these words publicly, there would be no taking them back. My family's dysfunction would become part of the public record. "My parents chose not to attend the funeral," I said finally. "They had other priorities that day." Other priorities. What could possibly be more important than supporting their daughter through the loss of her grandchildren? I took a deep breath and told her about the phone call about Jake's birthday celebration, about the social media posts during the funeral service. Amanda's expression shifted from sympathy to shocked outrage as the story unfolded. "They posted birthday party photos while you were burying your children. The timestamp showed they uploaded them during the graveside service. Amanda wrote furiously, her pen scratching across the paper with increasing urgency. How long had this favoritism toward your brother been going on? My entire life, but I never imagined it would extend to something like this. Have you spoken to them since the funeral? No, I blocked their phone numbers and cut all contact. Amanda looked up from her notes. That decision couldn't have been easy. It was the easiest decision I've ever made, I said, and I meant it. They showed me exactly who they are when I needed them most. I finally listened. As our conversation continued, Amanda asked increasingly pointed questions about my family dynamics. She wanted to know about childhood incidents, holiday celebrations, my parents' financial priorities. I found myself sharing stories I'd never told anyone, how they'd spent my college fund on Jake's failed business venture, how they'd missed my wedding shower for his basketball tournament, how they'd never once visited after Emma and Sophie were born, despite living only 20 minutes away. This trauma center represents more than just a memorial to your daughters, Amanda observed. It's also a response to familial abandonment during crisis. Children who lose parents shouldn't have to face that loss alone, I said. Neither should adults. Part of healing from trauma involves having people who show up consistently, who prioritize your well-being over their convenience. Amanda closed her notebook and turned off the recorder. Erin, I want to be completely transparent with you. This story is going to be big. The contrast between your parents' behavior and your response creates a narrative that will resonate with a lot of people. Are you prepared for that level of attention? I thought about David's insurance money sitting in the bank, about Casey's architectural plans, about Ryan's construction timeline. Everything was already in motion. The center would be built regardless of media coverage. If publicity helps other families understand that they're not alone, that there are resources available during crisis, then I'm prepared for whatever comes, I told her. Amanda gathered her materials and walked me to the lobby. The story will run in Sunday's edition. I'll email you a draft for fact-checking by Friday. As I drove home, I realized I'd just crossed a bridge I couldn't uncross. Within days, my family's cruelest moment would be public knowledge. My parents, who valued appearance and social status above all else, would find their carefully constructed image destroyed by their own choices. The thought should have frightened me, but instead I felt a strange sense of relief. For months, I'd carried the weight of their betrayal in silence. Soon that weight would be shared by everyone who read my story. And maybe some good would come from exposing the truth about what happened when a family's love proved to be conditional after all. Sunday morning arrived gray and drizzly, matching my nervous energy as I drove to 3 different convenience stores searching for copies of the Albany Times-Union. The story was scheduled to run, but I hadn't seen Amanda's final draft. She'd promised to email it Friday, but the message never came, leaving me to discover the finished article, along with the rest of the reading public. At the 3rd store, a Cumberland Farms on Madison Avenue, I finally found a stack of newspapers near the coffee station. My hands trembled as I unfolded the front page, scanning headlines about budget negotiations and school board elections. Nothing about trauma centers or family betrayal. Then I saw it prominently placed above the fold, "Grieving Mother Builds Hope from Heartbreak. Local Woman Creates Children's Trauma Center After Losing Family and Family Support." The subheading made my breath catch. Erin Caldwell transforms personal tragedy into community resource after parents chose son's birthday over funeral. Amanda had positioned the story exactly as she'd warned me she would. This wasn't just about the trauma center. It was about family dysfunction and abandonment during crisis. The article opened with a detailed description of Emma and Sophie's place, but quickly shifted to the circumstances that inspired its creation. She'd quoted me extensively about my parents' choice, including my exact words about their Facebook posts during the funeral. She'd also included quotes from Casey about the project's scope and from Ryan about the construction timeline. But it was the personal details that gave the story its emotional punch. While Caldwell mourned alone at her daughter's graveside service, her parents celebrated her brother's birthday at an upscale restaurant, posting cheerful family photos on social media, with timestamps that coincided exactly with the burial. Reading those words in print felt surreal. My family's most shameful moment had become part of the permanent record preserved forever in newspaper archives. The article continued for another 800 words, detailing the trauma center's features and my vision for helping other families avoid the isolation I'd experienced. Amanda had interviewed 2 local child psychologists who praised the project's design and several parents who'd struggled to find adequate grief counseling for their children. The piece concluded with information about the center's projected opening date and a quote from me that I barely remembered giving: "No family should have to choose between loyalty and love. When crisis strikes, support should be unconditional. That's the foundation upon which healing begins." I bought 4 copies of the paper and drove home, my phone already buzzing with notifications. By the time I reached my apartment, the Albany Times-Union's Facebook page had shared the article, generating dozens of comments within the first hour. The responses ranged from supportive to outraged. "What kind of parents choose a birthday party over their grandchildren's funeral?" wrote one commenter. "This woman is a hero for turning her pain into something beautiful," wrote another. Several people shared their own stories of family abandonment during difficult times. But it was the sharing that truly stunned me. Within 4 hours, the article had been shared over 200 times. By evening, that number had climbed to nearly 1,000. The story was spreading far beyond Albany, reaching readers across upstate New York and into neighboring states. My phone rang constantly throughout the day. David's Aunt Margaret called to express her pride in the Trauma Center project. Several former teaching colleagues reached out with support. The principal at Roosevelt Elementary asked if I'd consider speaking to their staff about recognizing trauma signs in students. But the most unexpected call came from a producer at Good Morning Albany, a local television program that aired weekday mornings on Channel 6. Jennifer Walsh introduced herself and asked if I'd be interested in appearing on Tuesday's show to discuss the Trauma Center project. "The response to your story has been overwhelming," Jennifer explained. "Our viewers are calling and emailing asking how they can support the project. We'd love to give you a platform to share more details about Emma and Sophie's place." I agreed to the television appearance, though I requested they focus primarily on the center rather than my family situation. Jennifer assured me they would respect my wishes while acknowledging that viewer interest seemed centered on both aspects of the story. Monday morning brought even more dramatic developments. The article had been picked up by the Associated Press and was now running in newspapers across the Northeast. My phone showed missed calls from area codes I didn't recognize: Boston, Hartford, Burlington, Portland. An email from Amanda Rodriguez contained a link to the story's online version, which had generated over 1,500 comments and been shared nearly 5,000 times. The article was trending on the Albany Times-Union's website, driving more traffic than any local story in the past year. "Aaron, this has exceeded everyone's expectations," Amanda wrote. "I've received interview requests from regional and national media outlets. Are you prepared for this level of attention?" I stared at my laptop screen, watching the comment count climb in real time. Strangers from across the country were reading about Emma, Sophie, David, and my parents' betrayal. The story was taking on a life of its own, growing far beyond anything I'd anticipated when I'd agreed to that first interview. But buried among all the attention and media requests, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: validation. For the first time since the accident, other people understood exactly what my parents had done to me. I wasn't alone in my outrage anymore. The Trauma Center would help children heal from loss, but this story was already helping adults recognize and name familial emotional abuse. The comment section was filled with people sharing their own experiences of conditional love and abandonment during crisis. My personal pain was becoming a catalyst for conversations about toxic family dynamics that many people had never felt safe having before. And somewhere in Albany, my parents were probably just discovering that their carefully guarded secret had become front-page news. The real consequences of their choices were just beginning. Tuesday morning's television appearance went better than I'd expected. Jennifer Walsh kept her promise to focus primarily on the trauma center, asking thoughtful questions about the facility's design and the services it would provide. We discussed the shortage of specialized trauma counseling for children and the innovative approaches Emma and Sophie's place would offer. Toward the end of the interview, Jennifer gently broached the family situation that had inspired the project. I reiterated my belief that no child should face trauma without adequate support, emphasizing that family abandonment during crisis could compound psychological damage significantly. The segment aired live at 7:30, and by 8:15 I was driving to my volunteer position at the Riverside Community Center, where I'd been helping coordinate after-school programming for at-risk youth. The work gave me purpose during the center's construction phase and reminded me why healing environments for children mattered so deeply. I'd barely settled at my desk when commotion erupted in the main lobby. Raised voices carried down the hallway, followed by the sound of the security guard Bernard attempting to diffuse some kind of confrontation. "Ma'am, please lower your voice. This is a community center with children present." "I don't care who's present, I want to see my daughter right now." My blood turned to ice. That voice belonged to my mother, Patricia. I hadn't heard it in months, but the shrill, demanding tone was unmistakable. Before I could decide how to respond, my office door burst open without a knock. Both my parents stood in the doorway looking haggard and furious. My father, Thomas, appeared to have aged 5 years since I'd last seen him. His usually neat appearance was disheveled, his shirt wrinkled, his face flushed with anger. My mother looked equally worse for wear, her carefully styled hair unkempt, her makeup smeared from crying. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Thomas shouted, striding into my office uninvited. "How dare you air our family business to the entire world?" Patricia followed close behind, her voice breaking with emotion. "Aaron, sweetheart, how could you say those things about us? We're your parents. We love you." I remained seated, my hands folded calmly on my desk. The months of therapy I'd been doing through my grief counselor had prepared me for this moment better than I'd realized. "You need to leave," I said quietly. "This is my workplace." "We're not going anywhere until you explain yourself," Thomas continued, his voice growing louder. "Do you have any idea what you've done to us? Our neighbors won't talk to us. Your mother can't show her face at the grocery store. People are calling us monsters." "You are monsters," I replied, my voice steady. "You chose a birthday party over your grandchildren's funeral. That's exactly what monsters would do." Patricia began sobbing dramatically. "We were in shock. We didn't know how to handle the situation. You can't destroy our reputation over one mistake." One mistake. I stood up slowly, feeling months of suppressed rage finally surfacing. "You've made Jake your priority my entire life. This was just the first time your favoritism had life or death consequences." By now, Bernard had appeared in my doorway along with several co-workers who'd been drawn by the shouting. Thomas noticed the audience and seemed to realize how his behavior was appearing to strangers. "This is a private family matter," he said, attempting to lower his voice. "It doesn't concern any of you people." "It became a public matter when you chose to abandon your daughter during the worst moment of her life," said Maria Santos, the center's director, stepping forward. "And it definitely concerns us when you disrupt our workplace with your screaming." Thomas's face grew even redder. "You don't know what you're talking about. The media twisted everything. We were grieving, too. You were posting birthday party photos on Facebook while I buried my children," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the hallway. "There's no way to twist that into something acceptable." The small crowd that had gathered murmured among themselves. Several people pulled out their phones, and I realized this confrontation was probably being recorded. Patricia seemed to notice the same thing. "Put those phones away," she shrieked. "This is harassment. You're all harassing us." That's when Thomas made his biggest mistake. He stepped forward and grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my skin. "You're going to call that reporter and tell her you lied," he hissed. "You're going to fix this mess you've created." Bernard moved instantly, stepping between my father and me. "Sir, you need to remove your hands from Ms. Caldwell immediately and exit the building. I'm not going anywhere until my daughter agrees to stop destroying our family." Bernard reached for his radio to call for additional security, but Thomas's grip on my arm tightened. That's when Maria Santos stepped in, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to managing crisis situations. "Sir, you have 10 seconds to release Ms. Caldwell's arm and leave this building voluntarily, or I will call the police and have you arrested for assault." The word assault seemed to penetrate Thomas's rage-filled fog. He looked around at the faces surrounding him, all of them watching his behavior with disgust and judgment. Slowly, he released my arm. "This isn't over, Aaron," he said quietly. "Family doesn't abandon family." "You're right," I replied. "Family doesn't abandon family. You taught me that lesson the hard way." As security escorted my parents from the building, I noticed that several people were indeed still filming. Patricia's breakdown in the lobby, Thomas's threats, the entire ugly confrontation was being captured from multiple angles. Within hours, those videos would be posted on social media with captions like, "These are the parents who chose a birthday party over their grandchildren's funeral." The footage would be shared thousands of times, adding a visual component to the story that had already captured public attention. My parents had just guaranteed that their behavior would receive even more scrutiny, not less. In their desperation to control the narrative, they'd provided the world with perfect evidence of exactly who they really were under pressure. The war they'd declared was about to become very public indeed. The confrontation videos went viral faster than I could have imagined. By evening, clips of my father grabbing my arm and my mother's breakdown in the community center lobby had been viewed over 50,000 times across various social media platforms. The captions ranged from factual, "Parents who skipped funeral confront daughter at her workplace," to emotional, "Toxic parents try to silence daughter who exposed their cruelty." Wednesday morning brought a flood of media attention that completely overwhelmed me. My phone rang constantly with interview requests from news outlets I'd never heard of. CNN, NBC, ABC, Fox News, NPR, and dozens of regional stations all wanted to discuss the story that had somehow evolved from a local human interest piece into a national conversation about family dysfunction and conditional love. Jennifer Walsh from Good Morning Albany called to warn me about the escalating coverage. "Aaron, this has grown beyond anything we anticipated. The major networks are picking up the story, and social media engagement is through the roof. You need to be prepared for intense scrutiny." She was right. By noon, Birthday Over Funeral was trending on Twitter with thousands of people sharing their own stories of family abandonment during crisis. The hashtag Emma and Sophie's Place was also gaining traction, with people asking how they could donate to the Trauma Center project. But it was the phone call from Dr. Lisa Chen at NBC's Today Show that truly stunned me. Dr. Chen was a child psychologist who served as a frequent contributor to the program, offering expert commentary on family dynamics and childhood trauma. "Mrs. Caldwell, your story has struck a nerve with our audience that I've rarely seen before," she explained. "We receive hundreds of emails daily from viewers, but this week over 3,000 people have written to us about your situation. Many are sharing similar experiences of family rejection during their darkest moments." She went on to explain that the Today Show wanted to feature my story as part of a broader discussion about toxic family dynamics and their impact on grief recovery. The segment would include expert analysis and resources for viewers dealing with similar situations. "We'd like to invite you to appear on Friday's show along with other family trauma experts. Your story has become a catalyst for important conversations about conditional love and emotional abuse." I agreed to the appearance, though I requested that they focus equal attention on the Trauma Center project. Dr. Chen assured me that Emma and Sophie's Place would be prominently featured as an example of transforming personal pain into community healing. Meanwhile, the fallout from my parents' workplace confrontation continued to escalate. Multiple news outlets had acquired copies of the security footage, and legal experts were commenting on Thomas's behavior during the incident. Attorney Sarah Goldstein appeared on several programs to discuss the assault allegations. When someone grabs another person's arm in an attempt to intimidate them, particularly during an emotionally charged confrontation, that constitutes assault under New York state law. The fact that this occurred in front of multiple witnesses makes prosecution relatively straightforward. I hadn't considered pressing charges, but the legal commentary made me realize that my father's behavior could have serious consequences beyond public embarrassment. The district attorney's office contacted me Thursday morning to discuss potential charges. Mrs. Caldwell, based on the video evidence and witness statements, we have grounds to pursue assault charges against your father, explained Assistant DA Michael Foster. However, we understand this is a family situation, so the decision ultimately rests with you. I requested time to consider the option, though. Part of me felt that legal consequences might be exactly what my parents needed to understand the seriousness of their actions. The media attention also brought unexpected positive developments. Donations for Emma and Sophie's place began pouring in from across the country. The project's GoFundMe page, which I'd created primarily for local supporters, suddenly showed contributions from all 50 states and several international donors. Casey Williams called Thursday afternoon with remarkable news. "Aaron, the donations have exceeded anything we could have hoped for. We're looking at an additional $500,000 in funding. We could expand the center significantly or establish an endowment for ongoing operations." Corporate sponsors were also reaching out. A major toy company wanted to donate play equipment. A technology firm offered to provide computers and educational software. Local businesses were volunteering services ranging from landscaping to legal counsel. But perhaps most meaningful were the personal messages from other parents who'd faced family abandonment during tragedy. A mother from Oregon wrote about her parents missing her son's funeral because of a cruise they refused to cancel. A father from Texas described his siblings choosing a wedding over supporting him through his daughter's cancer treatment. "Your courage in speaking publicly has given voice to experiences many of us thought were too shameful to share," wrote one woman. "Thank you for helping us realize we're not alone, and we're not crazy for feeling abandoned by the people who should have loved us unconditionally." By Thursday evening, I realized that my story had grown far beyond personal vindication. It had become a movement, a rallying cry for anyone who'd ever experienced conditional love from family members. The trauma center would certainly benefit from the attention, but more importantly, thousands of people were finding validation for their own experiences of familial emotional abuse. My parents, in their desperate attempt to control the narrative, had instead amplified it beyond their worst nightmares. Their behavior was now being analyzed by psychologists, legal experts, and social commentators on national television. The Today Show appearance would mark the peak of media attention, but it would also set in motion a series of events that would forever change the balance of power in my family's dysfunction. Justice, it seemed, was finally within reach. Friday morning found me in a green room at NBC's studios in Manhattan, surrounded by other guests preparing for the Today Show. The surreal nature of the situation wasn't lost on me. 6 months ago, I'd been a grieving elementary school teacher from Albany. Now I was about to discuss family trauma on national television with an audience of millions. Dr. Lisa Chen sat beside me reviewing her notes for the segment. She'd flown in from Chicago specifically for this discussion, having written extensively about family dysfunction and conditional love. Across from us sat Marcus Williams, a family therapist who specialized in helping adults recover from childhood emotional neglect. "Remember," Dr. Chen advised, "this conversation is bigger than your specific situation. You're representing thousands of people who've experienced similar abandonment. Stay focused on the broader message about unconditional family support." The segment was scheduled to run for 8 minutes, with the first half focusing on my story and the second half exploring the psychological impact of conditional love. Savannah Guthrie would conduct the interview from the studio couch while we participated via satellite from the network's guest facility. As makeup artists applied final touches, I reviewed the key points I wanted to emphasize the trauma center's mission, the importance of consistent support during crisis, and the difference between biological family and chosen family. I'd also prepared to discuss how grief recovery requires stable relationships with people who prioritize your well-being. The interview began exactly as planned. Savannah introduced my story by highlighting the contrast between personal tragedy and community response. She asked thoughtful questions about Emma and Sophie's place, allowing me to describe the facility's innovative design and the services it would provide for traumatized children. The center represents our belief that healing happens best in environments designed specifically for safety and support, I explained. Children who've experienced loss need specialized care from people who understand trauma's impact on developing minds. Savannah then shifted to the family dynamics aspect of the story, asking Dr. Chen to explain why some families struggle to provide unconditional support during crisis. The discussion was proceeding smoothly, covering exactly the topics we'd planned to address. Then 7 minutes into the segment, Savannah's expression changed slightly. She touched her earpiece and nodded to someone off camera. "Aaron, I have some unexpected news to share with our viewers," she said, her voice taking on a more dramatic tone. "We've just learned that your parents are here at our New York studio and would like the opportunity to address this situation publicly. They're asking for a chance to reconcile with you on air." My stomach dropped. The camera caught my shocked expression as I processed this ambush. My parents had somehow contacted the show's producers and convinced them to orchestrate this surprise confrontation. "I wasn't aware they would be here," I said carefully, trying to maintain my composure, while fury built inside me. "They've expressed deep regret about the misunderstanding surrounding your children's funeral and hope this platform can help heal your family's wounds," Savannah continued. "Would you be willing to hear what they have to say?" The word misunderstanding hit me like a slap. My parents had clearly spun the story to make their abandonment sound like a simple miscommunication rather than a deliberate choice to prioritize Jake's birthday over my children's burial. Before I could formulate a response, the camera cut to another shot, and suddenly my parents were walking onto the studio set. Thomas wore his best suit and had clearly gotten a professional haircut for the appearance. Patricia was dressed in conservative black clothing, her makeup perfectly applied to suggest solemn remorse. They took seats across from Savannah and immediately began their carefully rehearsed damage control performance. "We want to start by saying how sorry we are for the terrible misunderstanding that occurred during this tragic time." Thomas said, his voice heavy with practiced emotion. "We were in shock about losing our precious granddaughters and didn't handle the situation properly." Patricia dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "We miss Emma and Sophie terribly. Not a day goes by that we don't think about them. We've been devastated that our daughter has cut us out of her life during this difficult period." The manipulation was masterful. They were positioning themselves as grieving grandparents who'd made a minor error in judgment, while painting me as the unreasonable daughter who'd overreacted to a simple misunderstanding. Savannah looked between them and the satellite feed showing my face. "Aaron, your parents are expressing remorse. How do you respond to their explanation?" I took a deep breath, knowing that millions of people were watching this moment. My response would either expose their manipulation or allow them to successfully rewrite history. "There was no misunderstanding," I said clearly. "When I called to tell them my husband and children had been killed in a car accident, my father's exact words were, 'Today is your brother's birthday. We can't come. We already made reservations at that fancy steakhouse downtown.' Those aren't the words of people in shock. Those are the words of people with clear priorities." Thomas's composure cracked slightly. "Aaron, you're taking things out of context. We were planning to come to the funeral after Jake's dinner. You posted birthday celebration photos on Facebook during my daughter's graveside service." I interrupted, my voice rising. "The timestamps prove you were raising champagne toasts while I was throwing dirt on my children's coffins." The studio fell silent. Savannah looked between us, clearly realizing this wasn't the heartwarming reconciliation she'd been expecting to facilitate. Patricia tried a different approach. "Sweetheart, we love you so much. We just want our family back together. Can't we put this behind us and move forward?" "You want your family back together?" I stood up from my chair, removing my microphone. Where was that sentiment when I needed you most? Where was family loyalty when I was burying my babies alone? I looked directly into the camera. "To everyone watching who's experienced abandonment by family during your darkest moments, you deserve better. You deserve people who show up consistently, who prioritize your well-being over their convenience, who understand that love doesn't come with conditions." Then I walked out of the satellite room, leaving my parents stammering excuses to millions of viewers. The interview continued without me, but I'd already said everything that mattered. I'd refused to participate in their rehabilitation campaign and expose their behavior for exactly what it was: calculated cruelty disguised as misunderstanding. The Today Show appearance would be dissected and analyzed for weeks, but the most important outcome was immediate. My parents' attempt to control the narrative had backfired spectacularly, providing even more evidence of their manipulative nature. Their desperation was becoming increasingly obvious to everyone except themselves. The fallout from the Today Show appearance was swift and decisive. By Monday morning, legal experts across multiple news networks were analyzing my parents' behavior, particularly focusing on their attempt to manipulate public perception through what many commentators called calculated emotional manipulation on national television. The call I'd been expecting came Tuesday afternoon from Jennifer Walsh, my lawyer, who'd been monitoring the situation closely since the workplace confrontation incident. "Aaron, we need to discuss something serious," Jennifer said, her voice carrying an urgency I hadn't heard before. "Your parents have filed a lawsuit against you claiming emotional distress and defamation. But more concerning, they're also pursuing what they call wrongful death survivors' rights to a portion of David's life insurance money." I nearly dropped the phone. "They're trying to get David's insurance money." Their attorney is arguing that as grandparents of Emma and Sophie, they suffered direct emotional and financial harm from the deaths and deserve compensation as secondary survivors. They're also claiming grandparents' rights, stating they had an established relationship with the children that was wrongfully severed. The audacity was breathtaking. Not only were my parents attempting to profit from my daughter's deaths, but they were rewriting history to claim a loving relationship with grandchildren they'd barely bothered to visit while they were alive. "What kind of established relationship?" I asked, my voice tight with anger. "They visited Emma and Sophie exactly 3 times in 4 years. They missed their birthday parties, their first days of school, their Christmas programs. They couldn't even be bothered to come to their funeral." "That's exactly what we'll argue in court," Jennifer replied. "But I need to warn you, this type of litigation can be expensive and emotionally draining. They're clearly betting that you'll settle rather than fight." "They're wrong," I said immediately. "I'll fight this to my last dollar if necessary. They will not profit from my children's deaths." Jennifer paused. "There's more. They're also claiming that your public statements have caused them to lose employment opportunities and social standing in their community. They're seeking damages for what they term reputational destruction through malicious publicity." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. They destroyed their own reputation by choosing a birthday party over a funeral. I simply told the truth about what happened. Unfortunately, truth is only one factor in defamation cases. They're arguing that you intentionally portrayed them in a false light by omitting context about their grief and shock during the phone call. We spent the next hour reviewing their legal claims in detail. Their attorney had crafted a narrative suggesting that my parents were loving grandparents who'd been overwhelmed by grief and made poor decisions during an unprecedented crisis. The lawsuit painted me as a vindictive daughter who'd weaponized media attention to destroy their reputation for personal gain. The grandparents' rights claim was particularly galling. They were asserting that Emma and Sophie had been intentionally kept from developing a relationship with them, and that my current estrangement was preventing them from honoring their granddaughter's memory appropriately. We need to gather evidence of their actual relationship with the children, Jennifer explained. Photos, videos, documentation of visits, birthday cards, Christmas gifts, anything that establishes the real pattern of their involvement. That evening, I spent hours going through photo albums and saved text messages documenting my parents' minimal presence in Emma and Sophie's lives. The evidence was overwhelming. In 4 years, they'd sent exactly 2 birthday cards and 1 Christmas gift. They'd attended 0 school events, 0 medical appointments, 0 family celebrations at our house. But it was the text message history that provided the most damning evidence. Dozens of invitations to family dinners, birthday parties, school programs, all declined with variations of, "Jake has a game that night," or "We're taking Jake to look at colleges," or "It's not a good time for us." Jennifer reviewed the documentation with growing confidence. This actually strengthens our position significantly. Their lawsuit claims they were loving, involved grandparents who've been wrongfully denied access, but the evidence shows they voluntarily maintained minimal contact while prioritizing your brother's activities. Wednesday brought another unexpected development. A process server arrived at my apartment with additional legal documents, but these weren't from my parents' attorney. They were from the district attorney's office formally charging Thomas with assault based on the workplace confrontation video. The charges were more serious than I'd anticipated. Beyond simple assault, the DA was pursuing aggravated harassment charges due to the public nature of the incident and Thomas's attempt to use physical intimidation to silence protected speech. The defendant's behavior demonstrates a pattern of using manipulation and threats to control family members. The charging document stated, his physical assault of the victim in a public space while attempting to force her to retract truthful public statements represents a clear violation of her civil rights. The criminal charges would proceed independently of the civil lawsuit, but they significantly undermined my parents' claim to be misunderstood grieving grandparents. It was becoming increasingly difficult for them to maintain their victim narrative when facing criminal prosecution for assault. Friday brought the most shocking development yet. Jennifer called with news that would change everything about the legal battle. "Aaron, I've been investigating your parents' financial situation as part of our defense preparation," she said. "What I've found is going to devastate their lawsuit." She explained that during discovery research, she'd uncovered evidence that my parents had been living beyond their means for years, accumulating massive debt to fund Jake's expensive lifestyle and their own status-conscious spending. "But that's not the bombshell," Jennifer continued. "I found evidence that they've been telling people in their community that they're expecting a large inheritance from David's life insurance policy. They've been using this supposed windfall as collateral for additional loans." My blood ran cold. They've been borrowing money against insurance benefits they have no legal right to. Exactly. They've essentially been committing fraud by representing themselves as beneficiaries of your husband's policy. The banks and creditors they've borrowed from have documentation showing they claim to be entitled to a significant portion of the settlement. This revelation transformed the entire legal landscape. Rather than being sympathetic grandparents seeking rightful compensation, my parents were revealed as financial fraudsters who'd been exploiting my family's tragedy for personal gain. "We're going to file countercharges for fraud and misrepresentation," Jennifer explained. "This evidence shows their lawsuit isn't about grandparents' rights or emotional distress. It's about covering up their fraudulent financial schemes." As I processed this information, I realized that my parents' desperation had led them into criminal territory. Their attempt to profit from Emma and Sophie's deaths wasn't just morally reprehensible, it was potentially illegal. The legal battle would become far more complex than a simple family dispute. It was evolving into a criminal investigation that could result in serious consequences for Thomas and Patricia. Their greed had finally caught up with them, and the justice system was about to hold them accountable for years of manipulation and exploitation. Armed with Jennifer's devastating discoveries about my parents' fraudulent activities, we developed a comprehensive strategy that would expose not just their current lawsuit as frivolous, but their entire pattern of financial manipulation and emotional abuse spanning decades. "We need to be methodical about this," Jennifer explained during our strategy meeting. "The fraud evidence is explosive, but we want to present it in a way that maximizes impact both legally and publicly." She'd spent the week gathering documentation that painted a comprehensive picture of my parents' financial deception. Bank records showed they'd borrowed over $200,000 from various sources while claiming to be beneficiaries of David's life insurance policy. They'd provided false documentation to creditors, including forged letters supposedly from insurance companies confirming their inheritance rights. "This isn't just civil fraud," Jennifer continued. "This is criminal wire fraud, bank fraud, and identity theft. They used your husband's name and policy information without authorization to secure loans they had no ability to repay." We decided to hold a press conference for Thursday afternoon strategically timed to maximize media coverage, while giving legal authorities time to review the evidence beforehand. Jennifer had already shared our findings with both the District Attorney's Office and the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. The evidence we'd compiled was staggering. Beyond the insurance fraud, we'd uncovered a pattern of financial exploitation that extended back over 15 years. My parents had used Jake's name to secure credit cards he'd never applied for, then maxed them out, funding his lifestyle. They'd borrowed against property that belonged to other family members without permission. They'd even claimed fake business ventures to qualify for small business loans they'd never intended to repay. "Your brother appears to be both a victim and an unwitting accomplice," Jennifer observed. "He benefited from the fraudulent spending, but there's no evidence he knew the money was obtained illegally." Wednesday evening, I received an unexpected call from Jake himself. His voice was shaking when I answered. "Erin, I know you probably don't want to talk to me, but I need you to know something important. I found out what Mom and Dad have been doing with the money." I put him on speaker so Jennifer could hear the conversation. "What did you find out, Jake?" "I've been staying with them since they lost the house," he continued. "Yesterday, I overheard Dad on the phone with someone from a loan company talking about insurance payments he was expecting. When I asked him about it, he finally told me the truth." Jake's confession was more damaging than anything we could have uncovered independently. He revealed that our parents had been planning their lawsuit against me for months, viewing David's insurance money as their solution to financial ruin. They'd convinced themselves they had legitimate grandparents' rights to the funds and had been borrowing against those supposed future payments since shortly after the funeral. "Dad kept saying you owed us because we'd helped raise the girls," Jake said, his voice breaking. "But Erin, we both know that's not true. They barely visited Emma and Sophie. I can count on one hand the number of times they actually spent time with them." Jennifer leaned forward. "Jake, would you be willing to testify about these conversations in court?" "Yes," he said immediately. "I'm done protecting them. What they're doing is wrong and I can't be part of it anymore. I'm actually calling from a hotel room. I moved out of their house this morning." This development changed our strategy significantly. Having Jake as a witness would provide insider knowledge of our parents' fraudulent planning that we couldn't have obtained any other way. Thursday's press conference was held at Jennifer's law office with local and national media in attendance. The interest level was even higher than expected, with news crews from major networks positioning cameras while reporters filled every available chair. Jennifer opened the conference by outlining the basic facts of my parents' lawsuit and their claims to David's insurance money. Then she methodically presented the evidence of their fraudulent activities using charts and documents to illustrate the scope of their deception. "What we have here isn't a family dispute about inheritance rights," Jennifer announced. "We have documented evidence of an elaborate fraud scheme in which the defendants have used a family tragedy to obtain hundreds of thousands of dollars in illegal loans." The media reaction was immediate and intense. Reporters asked pointed questions about the timeline of the fraud, the amounts involved, and the legal consequences my parents would face. Jennifer handled each inquiry professionally, while making it clear that criminal charges were likely forthcoming. But the most powerful moment came when I addressed the cameras directly. For months, my parents have tried to portray themselves as grieving grandparents who made mistakes during a difficult time. I said, "The evidence shows that's completely false. They've been systematically exploiting my husband's death and my daughter's deaths for financial gain, while simultaneously claiming they loved them." I held up photos of Emma and Sophie. These children deserved grandparents who showed up for them while they were alive, not people who tried to profit from them after they died. The trauma center we're building in their memory represents real love, the kind that creates something beautiful from loss rather than trying to extract money from tragedy. The press conference footage would be replayed on news programs throughout the evening, but the most significant impact was yet to come. Within hours of our presentation, federal investigators announced they were opening a formal criminal investigation into my parents' financial activities. The lawsuit they'd filed against me suddenly seemed trivial compared to the federal charges they would likely face. Their attempt to claim David's insurance money had backfired spectacularly, exposing them to criminal prosecution that could result in years in federal prison. Justice was no longer a distant hope. It was an approaching certainty, and my parents had brought it upon themselves through their own greed and deception. Their desperate attempt to profit from my family's tragedy was about to cost them everything. The response to Thursday's press conference exceeded every expectation I'd held about community support and public outrage. By Friday morning, the story had evolved far beyond a family legal dispute into a national conversation about fraud, grief exploitation, and the power of truth to triumph over manipulation. The most immediate impact was financial. Emma and Sophie's Place received over $300,000 in donations within 24 hours of the press conference. The trauma center's GoFundMe page crashed twice due to traffic volume, with contributions pouring in from all 50 states and 12 foreign countries. Casey Williams called Friday afternoon with news that would transform the entire project. "Aaron, we're not just building a trauma center anymore. With this level of funding and support, we can create a comprehensive campus that will serve as a model for the entire country." The additional donations meant we could expand beyond the original 10,000 square foot building to include a research wing, a training center for trauma counselors, and a residential facility for families dealing with acute crisis situations. The project had grown from a local memorial into a national resource that would help thousands of families annually. But the financial support was only part of the community response. Mayor Patricia Richardson announced that Albany would provide an additional 5 acres of prime downtown real estate for the expanded facility at no cost to the project. The City Council had voted unanimously to fast-track all permits and zoning approvals, cutting typical development timelines from months to weeks. Emma and Sophie's Place represents the best of our community's values, Mayor Richardson said during Friday's City Council meeting. "When we see neighbors supporting neighbors, when we see tragedy transformed into hope, that's when Albany shows its true character." Corporate sponsors were offering unprecedented support as well. Microsoft announced they would provide all technology infrastructure for the facility, including computers, tablets, software, and ongoing technical support valued at over $200,000. Target Corporation offered to furnish the entire children's areas with age-appropriate furniture, toys, books, and educational materials. Local businesses were volunteering services that would have cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. Sullivan Construction, Ryan's main competitor, offered to donate all electrical and plumbing work. Hudson Valley Landscaping committed to creating therapeutic gardens and outdoor play areas. Even the Albany Symphony Orchestra pledged to provide regular music therapy sessions for children and families. The media coverage had also attracted attention from national foundations focused on trauma recovery and mental health advocacy. The National Child Traumatic Stress Network reached out about establishing Emma and Sophie's Place as an official research site for innovative therapy techniques. The American Psychological Association expressed interest in using the facility as a training location for graduate students specializing in childhood trauma. But perhaps most meaningful were the personal messages from individuals and families affected by the story. A grief support group in California sent a collective letter describing how my experience had helped their members feel less alone in their struggles with family abandonment during crisis. A widow in Michigan wrote that my courage in speaking publicly had inspired her to cut contact with relatives who'd blamed her for her husband's death from cancer. Your story gave me permission to prioritize my own healing over maintaining relationships with people who made my grief harder instead of easier, she wrote. Thank you for showing me that choosing myself isn't selfish when others refuse to choose me. Saturday brought the most surprising development yet. Dr. Amanda Foster, director of the National Institute of Mental Health, called to discuss establishing Emma and Sophie's Place as a federally funded research center focused on family dynamics during crisis and trauma recovery. Your facility could become the first comprehensive study site examining how family support, or lack thereof, impacts long-term trauma recovery in children, Dr. Foster explained. The federal funding would ensure the center's long-term sustainability while advancing our understanding of childhood trauma treatment. The conversation lasted over an hour, covering research possibilities, facility requirements, and the potential impact on trauma treatment nationwide. Federal funding would mean Emma and Sophie's Place could operate indefinitely, serving families for generations while contributing to scientific understanding of how children heal from loss. Sunday's development was both satisfying and poetic. The Albany Times-Union published a follow-up article revealing that my parents' neighborhood had organized a petition demanding they move away from the community. Over 80% of their neighbors had signed the document, citing the fraud scandal and their treatment of me as incompatible with neighborhood values. We don't want people living among us who would exploit their own grandchildren's deaths for financial gain, one neighbor told the reporter. Their behavior has brought shame to our entire community. The social ostracism my parents were experiencing seemed particularly appropriate, given their lifelong obsession with appearance and social status. They'd spent decades crafting an image of successful, loving parents, only to have that facade completely destroyed by their own actions. But the most powerful moment came during Sunday's groundbreaking ceremony for the expanded trauma center. Hundreds of people attended, including families who'd experienced loss, community leaders, construction workers who'd volunteered their time, and supporters from across the region. As I stood before the crowd holding shovels alongside Casey Ryan and Mayor Richardson, I realized that Emma and Sophie's legacy had grown far beyond anything I could have imagined when I'd first conceived of the trauma center. Their brief lives were inspiring, healing resources that would help children for decades to come. This facility exists because two little girls were loved deeply enough that their mother refused to let tragedy be the end of their story, I told the assembled crowd. Every child who finds healing here, every family who discovers hope in these buildings, every breakthrough in trauma research that happens within these walls will be a continuation of Emma and Sophie's impact on the world. The groundbreaking ceremony felt like a turning point, not just for the Trauma Center project, but for my own journey from grief toward purpose. My daughter's deaths had been transformed into a force for healing that would outlive everyone present at the ceremony. Meanwhile, my parents faced increasing legal jeopardy, social isolation, and financial ruin. The contrast between the community's embrace of Emma and Sophie's memory and their rejection of Thomas and Patricia's behavior couldn't have been more stark. Justice was taking many forms, but none was more satisfying than watching love triumph over manipulation, truth prevail over deception, and community support overwhelm family betrayal. The court hearing took place on a crisp Tuesday morning in October, exactly 8 months after Emma and Sophie's funeral. The Albany County Courthouse was packed beyond capacity, with overflow crowds gathering on the front steps and local news crews positioned strategically around the building perimeter. Judge Catherine Morrison had requested a larger courtroom to accommodate the media attention and community interest in the case. As I walked through the courthouse lobby with Jennifer, I noticed dozens of people wearing small purple ribbons, Emma's favorite color, to show their support for the Trauma Center project. My parents sat at the plaintiff's table with their attorney Marcus Reed, who looked increasingly uncomfortable as the morning progressed. Thomas appeared to have aged significantly since our last encounter, his face gaunt and his hands trembling slightly. Patricia kept her eyes fixed on the table, avoiding eye contact with anyone in the packed courtroom. The hearing began with Reed presenting their claims for inheritance rights and emotional distress damages. His arguments sounded weak, even to my non-legal ears, relying heavily on broad assertions about grandparents' rights, while providing little evidence of an actual relationship between my parents and the children. Your Honor, my clients are grieving grandparents who've been denied the opportunity to honor their granddaughter's memory due to their daughter's vindictive campaign of public humiliation, Reed argued. They seek only what's rightfully theirs as surviving family members. Judge Morrison listened impassively occasionally, taking notes but showing no indication of her thoughts about the arguments being presented. Then Jennifer rose to present our defense, and the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted dramatically. Your Honor, the evidence will show that this lawsuit represents nothing more than a continuation of the defendants' fraudulent scheme to profit from a family tragedy they themselves exacerbated through their callous abandonment of their daughter during her darkest hour. Jennifer methodically presented our documentation of my parents' minimal involvement in Emma and Sophie's lives, contrasting their claims of being loving grandparents with the reality of their behavior. Photos, text messages, calendar entries, and witness statements painted an undeniable picture of emotional neglect spanning the children's entire lifetimes. But it was the financial fraud evidence that truly stunned the courtroom. Jennifer displayed bank records, loan applications, and recorded phone conversations showing the elaborate scheme my parents had constructed around David's insurance money. The defendants have obtained over $200,000 in fraudulent loans by claiming to be beneficiaries of Mr. Caldwell's life insurance policy, Jennifer announced. They used forged documentation and false representations to secure funds they had no legal right to obtain. Judge Morrison's demeanor changed noticeably as the scope of the fraud became clear. She asked pointed questions about specific loan applications and requested clarification about the timeline of my parents' borrowing activities. The most damaging testimony came from Jake, who appeared via video conference from his new apartment in Buffalo. He described in detail the conversations he'd overheard about my parents' plans to claim David's insurance money, their lack of genuine grief about Emma and Sophie's deaths, and their primary concern about maintaining their lifestyle despite their financial problems. They talked about the lawsuit like it was a business deal. Jake testified, his voice steady but emotional. Dad kept saying Aaron owed us money because we'd helped with the kids, but that wasn't true. They barely knew Emma and Sophie. I visited them more in 4 years than my parents did. The courtroom was silent as Jake described the morning he'd decided to leave his parents' house, unable to continue supporting their fraudulent activities. I realized I had to choose between enabling their lies or standing up for what was right, he said. Erin lost everything in that accident, and instead of helping her heal, our parents tried to profit from her pain. I couldn't be part of that anymore. Reed's cross-examination of Jake was brief and ineffective. There was little he could do to discredit testimony from my parents' own son, particularly when Jake's statements were supported by extensive documentation. The prosecution's case concluded with recorded phone calls between my parents and various creditors obtained through the federal investigation into their fraudulent activities. The recordings captured Thomas and Patricia in their own words describing their supposed inheritance rights and their plans to use the money to pay off existing debts. When Reed rose to present my parents' rebuttal, he had virtually nothing to work with. He attempted to characterize the fraud as misunderstandings about inheritance law and described my parents as confused seniors who made poor financial decisions during grief. Judge Morrison's expression made it clear she found these explanations insufficient. The hearing's climax came when Judge Morrison delivered her ruling from the bench, an unusual decision that emphasized the exceptional nature of the case. I have reviewed extensive evidence regarding the defendants' relationship with their deceased granddaughters, their response to this family's tragedy, and their subsequent financial activities. Judge Morrison began. What I have found is a pattern of behavior that can only be described as morally reprehensible. She methodically dismantled every aspect of my parents' lawsuit, finding no evidence to support claims of grandparents' rights, no basis for emotional distress damages, and no legitimate standing to pursue inheritance claims. The defendants had minimal contact with their granddaughters during their lifetimes and chose to prioritize a birthday celebration over attending their funeral. Judge Morrison continued. Their subsequent attempts to profit from these deaths through fraudulent loan applications represent a new low in their already unconscionable conduct. But the judge wasn't finished. Furthermore, I find the defendants' lawsuit to be frivolous and filed in bad faith as part of their ongoing scheme to obtain money they have no legal right to claim. Accordingly, I am ordering them to pay the defendants' legal fees in the amount of $50,000 plus court costs. The courtroom erupted in applause, which Judge Morrison allowed to continue for several moments before calling for order. The criminal fraud charges would proceed separately, but the civil victory was complete and decisive. My parents' lawsuit was dismissed with prejudice, meaning they could never refile similar claims. They were also ordered to pay my legal costs, adding financial consequences to their public humiliation. As we left the courthouse, reporters surrounded us for statements about the ruling. I kept my comments brief but pointed. This was never about money, I told the assembled media. This was about justice for Emma and Sophie and accountability for people who tried to profit from tragedy. Today, justice was served. My parents left the courthouse through a side exit, avoiding the media and the crowd of supporters who'd gathered to celebrate the verdict. Their attempt to exploit my family's tragedy had failed completely, leaving them facing criminal charges, financial ruin, and complete social ostracism. The legal victory felt like a turning point, but I knew the real triumph would come when Emma and Sophie's Place opened its doors and began helping other families heal from trauma, with the support and love my daughters had deserved, but never received from their grandparents. 6 months after the court victory, Emma and Sophie's Place officially opened its doors on a brilliant spring morning that felt touched by divine blessing. The facility exceeded every vision I'd held during those dark months of planning and construction. What had begun as a modest trauma center had grown into a comprehensive healing campus that would serve as a model for similar facilities nationwide. The main building stretched across 15,000 square feet of thoughtfully designed space. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows into therapy rooms, decorated with soft colors and natural materials. The children's areas featured reading nooks that looked like Treehouse's art studios, equipped with every creative medium imaginable, and play therapy rooms designed to help young minds process trauma through guided activities. The outdoor areas were equally impressive. Therapeutic gardens wound through the property, offering quiet spaces for reflection and healing. A playground designed by child development experts provided age-appropriate activities for children dealing with various stages of grief and trauma. Even the parking lot had been designed with security and comfort in mind, ensuring families would feel safe from their first moment on the property. Opening day brought hundreds of visitors, including the first families who would receive services at the center. Maria Santos, who'd been hired as executive director, had carefully coordinated the schedule to balance celebration with the facility's serious mission of healing wounded children and families. Governor Sarah Chen attended the ribbon-cutting ceremony, having followed the story since my parents' fraud trial made national headlines. She spoke eloquently about the importance of community-supported mental health resources and announced that New York State would provide ongoing funding to ensure the center's long-term sustainability. Emma and Sophie's Place represents what we can accomplish when tragedy is transformed into purpose. Governor Chen told the assembled crowd. This facility will help children heal for generations to come, ensuring that 2 young lives lost too soon will continue making a positive impact on the world. Dr. Lisa Chen from the Today Show had flown in from Chicago to attend the opening and document the center's innovative approaches for a follow-up segment. She was particularly impressed by the Family Support Wing, which would provide counseling and resources for adults dealing with abandonment during crisis. What makes this facility unique is its recognition that healing happens within relationships, Dr. Chen observed during her tour. Too many trauma centers focus solely on individual therapy without addressing the family and community dynamics that either support or hinder recovery. But the most meaningful moment came when I announced the center's newest program during the opening ceremony speech. Today I'm proud to reveal that Emma and Sophie's Place will include a specialized program for adults who've experienced family abandonment during their darkest moments. I told the gathered crowd, we're calling it the Unconditional Support Initiative, and it's designed to help people rebuild their lives when their biological families have failed them. The audience included dozens of people who'd reached out to me over the past months, sharing their own stories of family betrayal during crisis. A woman whose parents had missed her son's funeral because of a golf tournament. A man whose siblings had refused to help during his wife's terminal illness because it interfered with their vacation plans. A teenager whose grandparents had disowned her after her parents died in a plane crash, leaving her to navigate the foster care system alone. These individuals would be among the first participants in the new program, receiving both individual counseling and group support as they learned to build chosen families from the communities around them. The program was particularly important to me because it represented the lesson I'd learned most powerfully during my own journey. Sometimes the people who show up consistently matter more than the ones who share your DNA. As the ceremony continued, I noticed a familiar figure standing at the back of the crowd. Jake had driven down from Buffalo for the opening, wearing a simple black suit and carrying a large bouquet of purple flowers, Emma's favorite color. We spoke briefly after the formal program ended our first face-to-face conversation since the court hearing. "I'm proud of what you've built here," he said quietly. "Emma and Sophie would have loved this place." They would have, I agreed. And they would have loved having an uncle who showed up for them. Jake's eyes filled with tears. "I know I can't undo the past, but I want you to know I'm in therapy now, working on understanding how I enabled Mom and Dad's behavior for so many years. I want to be better." I appreciated his honesty, though I wasn't ready to rebuild a relationship with any member of my biological family. Too much damage had been done, and my emotional energy was better spent on the healing work that lay ahead. The afternoon included tours of the facility for families, media interviews with key supporters, and private consultations with the first children who would receive services. Watching traumatized young faces light up as they explored the art studios and play areas reminded me why this project mattered more than any personal vindication. Evening brought a quieter celebration for the staff volunteers and major donors who'd made the center possible. Casey Williams presented architectural drawings for Phase 2 of the project, which would add residential facilities for families in acute crisis. Ryan Mitchell announced that his construction company would donate all labor for the expansion, continuing their commitment to the center's mission. As the day wound down, I found myself alone in the memorial garden, dedicated to Emma, Sophie, and David. 3 small bronze plaques marked a quiet corner where families could come to remember loved ones lost to sudden tragedy. "We did it," I whispered to their memory. "We built something beautiful from all that pain." The center would help thousands of families over the coming years, but its greatest victory was already complete. My daughter's deaths had been transformed from a senseless tragedy into a force for healing that would outlive everyone who'd contributed to its creation. Meanwhile, my parents faced an uncertain future marked by criminal prosecution, financial ruin, and social isolation. Their attempt to profit from Emma and Sophie's deaths had cost them everything they'd claimed to value: money, status, community standing, and family relationships. The contrast between their destruction and the center's creation felt like the universe's way of balancing the scales. Love had triumphed over greed, community support had overwhelmed family betrayal, and my daughter's legacy had grown far beyond anything their grandparents could have destroyed. Justice had taken many forms throughout this journey, but none was more satisfying than watching Emma and Sophie's place come alive with the laughter and healing of children who would never have to face trauma alone. 1 year after Emma and Sophie's place opened its doors, I stood in the memorial garden on a crisp autumn morning, watching golden leaves drift past the bronze plaques that honored my family's memory. The center had grown beyond every expectation, serving over 400 children and their families, while pioneering new approaches to trauma recovery that were being studied by researchers nationwide. The past months had brought profound changes to every aspect of my life. The center operated with a staff of 25 full-time counselors, therapists, and support specialists, making it one of the largest pediatric trauma facilities in the Northeast. Federal funding from the National Institute of Mental Health had ensured long-term sustainability while supporting groundbreaking research into how family dynamics affect childhood trauma recovery. But perhaps more meaningful than the professional success was the personal healing that had emerged from building something beautiful from devastating loss. I'd found my purpose in helping other families navigate their darkest moments with the support and consistency my daughters had deserved but never received from their grandparents. The Unconditional Support Initiative had become the center's most innovative program, serving adults who'd experienced family abandonment during crisis. Support groups met weekly, providing safe spaces for people to process the unique grief that comes from being failed by those who should have loved them unconditionally. Many participants described the program as life-changing, helping them understand that family abandonment said nothing about their worth and everything about their relatives' limitations. I'd also found unexpected love again. Dr. Michael Torres, a widowed child psychiatrist who joined the center's staff 6 months after opening, had become my partner in both professional and personal endeavors. Michael had lost his wife and infant son in a medical malpractice case 3 years earlier, and his parents had similarly abandoned him during the lawsuit, claiming he was dwelling on the past instead of moving forward. Our shared experience of family betrayal during grief had created a foundation of understanding that I'd never imagined possible. We were planning to marry next spring in the center's memorial garden, surrounded by the community that had embraced us when our biological families had failed us. The legal consequences for my parents had been severe and lasting. Thomas had been sentenced to 18 months in federal prison for bank fraud, wire fraud, and identity theft. Patricia received 8 months in minimum security detention, followed by 2 years of probation. Their financial restitution requirements would likely keep them in debt for the rest of their lives. More significantly, they'd become pariahs in their former social circles. The combination of criminal conviction fraud exposure and public awareness of their funeral abandonment had made them unwelcome in most community settings. They'd been forced to move to a small apartment in a different county where they lived quietly and avoided public attention. Jake had maintained minimal contact with them while focusing on his own healing and recovery. He'd completed 18 months of therapy, found steady employment as a construction supervisor, and was slowly learning to build healthy relationships without the dysfunction that had characterized our childhood family dynamics. He visited the center occasionally, always respectfully and without expectation of reconciliation. I appreciated his growth, but remained committed to protecting my emotional energy for the healing work that had become my life's mission. The afternoon brought a special event that perfectly captured the center's evolving impact. Dr. Amanda Foster from the National Institute of Mental Health was visiting to announce that Emma and Sophie's Place would become the primary research site for a 5-year study examining how consistent family support affects trauma recovery outcomes in children. This facility represents the gold standard for trauma-informed care, Dr. Foster told the assembled staff and board members. The research conducted here will influence how we approach childhood trauma treatment for decades to come. But the real measure of our success walked through the center's doors every day in the form of healing children and grateful families. 7-year-old Marcus, who'd lost his father in a construction accident, had progressed from selective mutism to confident self-expression through our art therapy program. 10-year-old Sarah, whose mother had died in a car accident, similar to the one that killed David and the girls, had learned to process her grief through guided play therapy and was thriving in school again. Their families had found support networks within our programs that extended far beyond professional counseling. Parents formed lasting friendships with others who understood their journey. Siblings connected with peers facing similar losses. Grandparents learned how to provide appropriate support without trying to replace lost parents. The center had become exactly what I'd envisioned during those dark months of planning a place where love showed up consistently, where support came without conditions, where healing happened within the safety of genuine community care. That evening, I received an unexpected letter forwarded through Jennifer Walsh's office. The return address showed it came from my parents, though I'd had no direct contact with them since the court hearing. The letter was brief and carefully worded, clearly written after consultation with their attorney. They expressed regret about their behavior during my time of loss and requested the opportunity to rebuild our family relationship. They mentioned their desire to honor Emma and Sophie's memory appropriately, and their hope that time and reflection had created space for mutual forgiveness. I read the letter twice, feeling neither anger nor sadness, just a profound sense of detachment from people who remained fundamentally unchanged, despite losing everything they'd claimed to value. They still couldn't acknowledge the specific cruelty of choosing Jake's birthday over my children's funeral. They still couldn't admit to deliberately exploiting my family's tragedy for financial gain. They still couldn't recognize that their behavior reflected deep character flaws rather than simple mistakes during grief. I filed the letter away without responding, knowing that my silence was the most appropriate answer I could give. They'd had their chance to be family when I needed them most, and they'd chosen differently. The consequences of that choice would last for the rest of our lives. But their failure to love me unconditionally had inadvertently given me the greatest gift possible: the understanding that real family is created through consistent presence, during both joy and crisis, through actions that match words, through love that doesn't come with fine print or conditions. Emma and Sophie's place was filled with real family staff members who showed up every day to heal wounded children, volunteers who gave their time because community care mattered to them, donors who contributed because helping others was more important than helping themselves, and families who'd found each other through shared experience and mutual support. As I locked the center's doors that evening and walked through the memorial garden one final time, I felt deep gratitude for the journey that had brought me to this place of purpose and peace. My daughters' brief lives had created ripple effects of healing that would continue long after everyone currently involved with the center had moved on. Emma and Sophie would never know how many children their legacy had helped, how many families their memory had strengthened, how many people their story had inspired to choose love over greed, community over selfishness, hope over despair. But I knew, and that knowledge filled the empty spaces in my heart where grief had lived for so long. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't defeating those who've wronged you, it's refusing to let their cruelty poison your capacity to create something beautiful for others. My parents had taught me that family love could be conditional, that support could be rationed, that loyalty could be withdrawn based on convenience. But Emma and Sophie's place proved every day that there was another way to love unconditionally, consistently, without reservation or conditions. That was the lesson I wanted to share with everyone who'd followed this journey from tragedy to triumph. Have you ever experienced a moment when someone's betrayal actually led you to discover a deeper truth about love and loyalty? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below about how we can build stronger communities of support for people during their most difficult times. If this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories about resilience, healing, and the power of transforming pain into purpose. Don't forget to share this with someone who might need to hear that they're not alone in their struggles with family dysfunction or grief. Thank you for joining me on this journey from heartbreak to healing. Remember that your worth isn't determined by how others treat you. During your darkest moments, it's determined by how you choose to respond to life's challenges and whether you use your experiences to help others find hope. May you always be surrounded by people who show up consistently, love you unconditionally, and prioritize your well-being during both celebration and crisis. That's what real family looks like, whether it's biological or chosen. Until next time, keep building love where you find none, creating hope, where you face despair, and remembering that sometimes the most powerful form of justice is living so well that those who wronged you become irrelevant to your joy.